Hi, everyone. I want to talk about the question of whether or not blessings, right? This is a Parsha where uh, Yitzchak gives blessings to his children, if blessings are limited. And I'd like to suggest that question relates to a lot of other questions. One of them, for example, is at the end of the Parsha when Yitzchak, Isaac, gives his blessing to Yaakov mistakenly. Right? He intended to give it to his other son, Esau, but he gives it to Jacob instead. Um, the Torah says he trembles a great trembling. Now, why did he tremble so much? The sages actually teach us he trembled so much it was equivalent to the type of trembling that he engaged in when he was brought up for a sacrifice by his father Abraham, so many years before, with the story of the Akedah. So there's something real powerful going on with this trembling when he gives a blessing to Yaakov. Why so much trembling? So he made a mistake. So he gives a blessing to Jacob. Is that so terrible? And even if we want to say that it is so terrible, can't he rectify it? Can't he just give blessings elsewhere afterwards, moving forward and solve the whole problem? So to understand what he was really trembling about, I want to take a step back and talk about blessings in general and the connection of giving a blessing and prophecy. Because our sages say that the two are very much connected, and some of the rules that govern giving prophecy also govern giving a blessing. So, what exactly are the rules of prophecy? So, one of them is that you have to be in a state of joy in order to prophesize. Doesn't matter how smart you are, how much wisdom you have, how holy you are, how close you are to God. If you don't also have the vessel of joy, Chazal say you can't give a prophesize. You can't prophesize. In fact, there's a interesting study I came across where a group of experimenters wanted to see whether or not people would eat chocolate cake, totally normal chocolate cake. It had fine ingredients. It was healthy. It was cooked properly. It had everything going for it. One exception was that the experimenters made it look like dog feces. It's not a error as your video is recording properly. Dog feces. They wanted to see whether or not people would eat it because of the way it looked, even though it was 100% fine otherwise. And they told the people, they said, we're doing an experiment. There's nothing wrong with this cake. It actually tastes very, very good. They demonstrated that it tastes very good. And he told them everything that was in it. They said there's absolutely no dog feces connected to it whatsoever, just in its appearance. Would the people eat it? And to their surprise, even after hearing all the explanations, the people balked. They refused to eat it because of the way it looked, because of the way it was presented, because of the container with which all of the proper ingredients were served. And to a certain extent, that's what prophecy is as well. You can have all the wisdom in the world, you can have miracles performed on your behalf and by you. You can have a tremendous amount of holiness. But if you don't have joy as well, if you're not in a state of joy, you can't prophesize. And the sages say something very similar is going on when you give blessings. You have to be in a state of joy. So if that's true, I think we can understand a couple of other questions from the Parsha, right? We're told that Yitzchak loved his son Esau. Why? Because he was a hunter that brought in meat and he liked to eat the meat. I always thought that's a strange, sort of superficial reason to love a child. Also, right before he gives the blessing, near the end of the Torah portion, he says to his son Esau, go get me some food so I can bless you. What's the connection of eating the food so that I can bless you? So perhaps the food that Esau brought in, good food, good cheer, good drink, put Yitzchak in a proper state of mind. It was a time of rejoicing as a result. He had the ability of transforming something purely physical into an emotional state, right? It enabled him to be joyous, right? Think about when you go to a wedding or a celebration and there's good company and food and wine and all these things, you become more generous of spirit. You're in a good mood. And so perhaps that's what happened with Yitzchak as well. And he knew that if he ate this type of food, he would be elevated to a state of joy, this emotional state, and then he'd be able to transform that emotional state into a spiritual blessing, that he'd be able to bless his son Asaph. So there's something quite beautiful about this idea that you have to be in a state of joy in order to give a blessing. Right? It's parallel to, in a sense, all our mitzvot. It's suggesting that you want to make a blessing, you want to study Torah, you want to pray. Well, you have to first put yourself in a state of joy. I remember once hearing from Rav Steinsaltz that he said that before they would light the Hanukkah candles, he would sing and dance for a half hour to get him into the proper state so that when he fulfilled the mitzvah of lighting the candles, he did it properly. And so there's something motivational, I think, in this teaching, that we have to make sure that we put ourselves in the proper state to access the real depths of the mitzvah we're about to perform. There's also something a little bit sad in this understanding as well, especially with regards to this parsha. You see, Yitzchak felt he only had one blessing to give because he knew he had to be in a state of joy. And what gave him joy was this meat that his son Esau brought to him. But maybe there are other ways that he could have developed that state of joy. It says in the beginning of the Torah portion that he loved Esau, but it doesn't mention his love for Yaakov. It's almost as if he appreciated the state of joy that his son Esau was able to provide for him. And once he had that state, he didn't see any other way to develop the same state of joy. But he should have explored. He didn't see that there was another son that maybe would have been different. But he could have also given him a sense of joy. Maybe it wouldn't have been by providing him a meal, but maybe by sitting and learning with him, maybe by spending time just walking with him, maybe by other things that he accomplished, maybe by other elements of his personality that was different than Esau. And I think this gets to the heart of the matter of why Yitzchak trembles this great trembling. You see, at the end of the week's Torah portion, the Torah tells us through its narrative that Yitzchak was wrong to think that he couldn't give a blessing to Yaakov. It tells us the blessing took hold. Yeah, he was tricked to giving it, but he blessed Yaakov. It worked. And I think he trembled at that moment because until that point in time, he didn't think there was any way he could give a blessing to Yaakov because Yaakov didn't give him the same element of joy. But when he gives him the blessing, he realized, wow, first of all, Yaakov prepared that meal that he ends up eating. So he didn't need a hunter like Esau. It could have been prepared a different way. I think there's a deeper idea there. He could have found other avenues to achieve joy with his son's relationship with Yaakov, and he trembles this great joy, this great trembling that he can't rectify because he's looking back on his entire life. In his entire life, he felt he had only one path to achieve joy, one path, one child with whom he could really love because he helped him with that state of joy, and therefore he had only one child whom he could bless all this time. And the Torah tells him, no, you can also bless your other child. You have more love to give. And I think at that point in time, Yitzchak realizes the tragedy of what's taken place over the course of his life in raising his two children. It's tragedy, of course, for Yaakov, who didn't really feel the love of his father his entire life. It's a tragedy for Esau as well, because the love he receives is purely conditional. And it's a tragedy, perhaps most of all, for Yitzchak. He thought he couldn't give love. He thought it was limited, that he didn't have enough, that it couldn't expand. And that's, of course, a great tragedy. And he trembles this great trembling because he realized he's lived his entire life under a misconception. And the misconception was that he couldn't give more to more people. I remember once my wife, Rachel, went away on a conference or something like that, and I was in charge of the children for a week. And because she was away, and I really wanted to make it a good experience for them, so I went above and beyond. I tried to do a lot of fun things with them and get them all the foods they love to eat, and spend a lot of time. And we had a great time. And indeed, when my wife came home, she said, "So how was it with Abba? How was it with Dad for the week that I wasn't here?" And my 7-year-old, at that time, she's now 16, precocious Daria said, two thumbs up, excited, enthusiastic, "It was great with Dad, great with Abba." And I felt really good. I said, "Wow, I did a good job." And I said out loud, even, "Could this even be Daria that you now I'm your favorite? Wow, that's exciting." To which she sort of stabbed me in the back and said, "No, no, you misunderstand me. Remember when you were away for a couple of weeks as well? This was earlier in the year. I had also gone away for some time and traveling, and only mommy was home. That was super great as well." So if I want to sort of flip that stab in the back from my daughter Daria, what I think she was perhaps trying to say um, is that both times could be great, that she could appreciate and enjoy the company of her father for who he is, but that in no way took away from the joy she could have with her mother. And there's something very special about children. They can love whoever they're with. They can see that person for the qualities that they have, and they don't need to compare that person to a different person. Unfortunately, as we get older, sometimes we do that. We begin to compare. This child is great, but when I compare him to that other child, maybe less so because they can't do X. What the Parsha is really teaching us, so they can't do X. But look at the other child who can do Y and find the Y in the other child and to appreciate each child wherever they are and to appreciate all our relationships wherever they are and realize that when it comes to certain qualities, when it comes to love, we're not limited. God gives us the ability to be like God in this amazing way. And we can have unlimited and we can love this person and that person exactly for who they are. And we don't need to sacrifice anything in that regard.